The Biden administration is preparing its policies for dealing with climate change. And as it does, our next guest is issuing a warning about a state based climate program. Patrick Gleason is Vice President of State Affairs at Americans for Tax Reform. Patrick, you recently wrote in Forbes about something called the Transportation and Climate Initiative. Why should we know about this?
Well, Mitch, the reason why you should know about it is because the backers of this proposal, the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which is, in short, it's a regional cap and trade regime. It'd be a new regulatory multi-state superstructure. And in short, it would lead to an inflation in gas prices. And so that's what it is. Why should folks in North Carolina know about it? Well, they should know about it because both the proponents of this program as well as their governor are supportive of it and want to bring it to North Carolina. So that's why they should know about it, both what it does and how it works and some of the pitfalls, because the people pushing this, although they're currently focused on 12 to 13 mid-Atlantic and northeastern states, they ultimately would like to come to North Carolina. And the governor of your state, Governor Roy Cooper, has quietly signed up to a statement committing to helping advance this program. So it's certainly something to keep an eye on for North Carolinians, even though the state is not currently a member of this program.
One of the main focuses of your column at Forbes was the fact that this particular initiative, once again, it's called the Transportation and Climate Initiative, or TCI, has fallen short of what its supporters have been looking for as it's started out, of the idea of trying to get all these northeastern states together, and as well as some mid-Atlantic states. Hasn't quite gone the way that they expected.
Yeah, so they originally thought they were going to get about a dozen northeastern and mid-Atlantic states I mentioned to join onto this program. These efforts started about a year and a half, a little over a year and a half, about 2 years ago. These have been led by the Massachusetts Governor, Charlie Baker, in conjunction with the Georgetown University Climate Center. And so they started out anticipating they would get 12 or 13 states, mostly blue states. And in the end, they were only able to get a handful. They were only able to get Charlie Baker's state of Massachusetts himself, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Washington, D.C. So only 3 states plus the District of Columbia. So this is an example of how command and control environmental policies like carbon taxes or cap and trade, although they get a lot of support, lip service, vocal support from leading politicians, they fall flat when they're put towards elected officials or voters. And we've seen that with carbon taxes that have been put to voters and blue state lawmakers. Those have been repeatedly rejected over the last decade. And this is just the latest example of that. And we're seeing with this blue state rejection of a regional cap and trade program. And I think it's noteworthy that the Democratic governor of Maine, who has a Democratic-controlled legislature, has very progressive advisors, even they did not deem it appropriate to sign on to even the supportive statement that Governor Roy Cooper signed North Carolina onto. Not even the Democratic far-left governor of Maine thought that was appropriate. And for some of the reasons why that is, and some of the reasons why this proposal has fallen flat, even in political landscapes that you think might be inclined to adopt this, the part of the reason why it's fallen flat for a couple of reasons. One, the end result of this program would disproportionately harm low-income households. So it imposes the greatest cost on those who can least afford it. It effectively acts as a regressive tax increase. It has the same problems in that respect as carbon taxes. And that's why we've seen carbon taxes rejected, whether it's in legislative form or ballot measure form, even in blue states. So it has the same effect as carbon taxes in that it would lead to a regressive tax increase that would disproportionately harm low and middle income households. So that's one problem. The other is this seems to be a proposal in search of a problem. So the Transportation and Climate Initiative, TCI for short. TCI, the people proposing this and its backers at Georgetown University Climate Center and in Massachusetts Governor's Administration, even they admit, and you can see this in their materials, even they acknowledge transportation emissions in that region are projected to decline even without a new cap and trade program. So they are projecting a reduction of emissions from transportation in that coming years, even without a cap and trade program. So what this does is this just gets a little bit extra emission reduction in what they're already going to achieve, but with great economic pain. And again, pain that falls disproportionately on those who can least afford it. So just as we have the White House getting ready to embark on its climate proposals, that comes on the heels of this latest cap and trade scheme falling short, not just falling short, well short of the number of states they were hoping to get to sign up, but doing so in a part of the country where Democrats, and progressive Democrats in particular, are in power. And you think they would be inclined to join on something like this, but they did not. That's telling. But what's odd to many observing this, and what was a surprise to many, was to see North Carolina be signed on to that supportive document again that some of these blue states that were originally targeted didn't support. So it was a very big surprise. Even in the TCI states, they did not expect to see that. So a big question mark, I think, that's out there. I explained why this program is not getting necessary support, because it acts as a regressive tax hike, because it disproportionately harms the poor. A good question is why Governor Roy Cooper is not being more forthright with his support for this program. But I think we answered our own question, which is the results, the end effects of this program are not popular. He is smart enough to understand that, and I think that's why you didn't see this mentioned once on the campaign trail last year. You think this is a significant multi-state regulatory superstructure that, according to some projections, could increase the cost of gas at the pump by over 30 cents per gallon. You think this would be something, such a major initiative, the governor would talk about this, didn't mention it once, and quietly signed the state onto the supportive document. So I think it's a big question that needs to be put towards the governor as to why he's not being forthright with North Carolinians about this, and what he foresees as the next steps towards implementing this program in North Carolina.
My guess is that before seeing our interview or reading your column in Forbes, a lot of people here in North Carolina will have not heard of this TCI at all, or that Governor Roy Cooper had anything to do with it. Can you tell me a little bit more detail about how he has signaled that he's interested in this without actually getting a whole lot of publicity? This involves signing on to some sort of background letter or something of that sort, right?
Yeah, so in the draft rule and the new memorandum of understanding for the program TCI, when that came out at the beginning of the year, that was a couple things happened. That's when the proponents of the program, Charlie Baker and others, realized how short they had fallen of their mark. They were planning to go towards getting only those 3 states plus DC, but they had an accompanying statement. So while only 3 states plus DC agreed to launch the program and implement it, more states, including North Carolina and most of the 12 states they originally targeted, but not all of them. I mentioned Maine didn't sign on. North Carolina signed on to this accompanying statement. It's basically saying, while we are not going to commit ourselves to launching this program at this juncture, we will be following this. We will participate and collaborate with TCI and its participating states. We will take steps to advancing the program and to implementing it in our states and taking those steps. So basically they said, we can't commit all the way to launching this program right now at this time, like we're seeing in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and DC, but we would like to eventually get there. And something that TCI proponents had been talking about in the lead up to the 2020 elections was they thought if Democrats had taken control of the North Carolina General Assembly, they thought that was going to be their chance to implement this in North Carolina, because the governor could then go, get legislative approval, like they're currently seeking in Connecticut and Rhode Island. The TCI implementing bills are currently moving through those legislatures, moving through the Connecticut legislature, and it's about to be introduced in Rhode Island. Governor Charlie Baker seems to think he can impose this by executive fiat, but all the other states seem to agree that they need legislative sign-off. So Governor Roy Cooper was denied Democratic control of the state legislature. Voters sent a very clear message that while they returned him to office, they put a check on him, and they voted to maintain that check on him in the form of a Republican-led legislature. That said, it seems that Governor Cooper has decided that this is not the end of his TCI visions, and that he's going to proceed with this first step being signing on to this letter, saying he's going to seek to help advance the program and ultimately carry it out. But he's not subjecting it to any legislative input. And we mentioned that Governor Cooper did not mention this major program once on the campaign trail. I've reached out to his office to ask who in the administration they are consulting, what advisors are working on this program, what was the decision-making process that went into deciding to sign North Carolina on to this accompanying TCI support letter, while not committing to launching it at this juncture, committing to taking steps to ultimately get there. They would not respond to those questions. I asked, not only what advisors, were there any department or agency heads involved in this? If so, whom? How many meetings were held? They did not want to answer those. I've checked with folks in the legislature. None of them have been contacted that I've talked to have been contacted by the governor's office about TCI. So it seems though he did not get a legislature that would help him advance this program. He's quietly behind the scenes taking steps to keep it moving along to ultimately impose it in North Carolina is my concern. So whether you like this program or not, you should be more upfront about it, is my thought. And so I think it's incumbent upon members of the press corps, the State House press corps in North Carolina, to start asking the governor about this. But certainly members of the public might even want to begin to ask their elected officials about this, because we've seen some steps that can be taken in other states. Pennsylvania, for example, introduced and passed legislation prohibiting their governor from signing on to any regional cap and trade programs without legislative approval. They said, look, if you want to sign on to a program like TCI, fine, but you got to come to elected representatives and get sign off. They passed that in Pennsylvania. Their Democratic governor, Tom Wolf, vetoed it, which tells you he would like to maintain the ability to impose a regulatory a scheme via executive order. I think that would be whether or not the governor in North Carolina, Cooper, would veto it like the Pennsylvania governor. I think it would be instructive regardless, because we would learn with a veto, we'd at least learn that not only would we get ultimate confirmation that the governor wants to impose this in North Carolina, but we get confirmation that he wants to maintain the ability to do so solely via executive fiat and without any consultation with elected officials in the General Assembly. I think that would be telling. So I think that would be very helpful to see legislation like we saw in Pennsylvania introduced here in North Carolina, because if it got enacted, that would be great, because such an important and sweeping program should be subject to approval from elected officials in the General Assembly. But even if it gets vetoed, it'll be a clear signal for the public as to where the governor stands on this and what levers of authority he would like to keep open for imposing it on North Carolinians. So that's what I see right there.
If you'd like to learn more about this agreement called the Transportation and Climate Initiative, you can read the column at Forbes.com. Its headline, "As Biden Administration Prepares Climate Policy Push, Cap and Trade Falls Flat in Democratic-Run States." Its author is Patrick Gleason, Vice President at Americans for Tax Reform. Patrick, thanks so much.
Thank you, Mitch.